Alright guys, so we're going to go ahead and get started. First and foremost, thanks for stopping by. Like I mentioned with the first lesson that we did regarding raid bots and simming your character, this series is really meant to just give everybody sort of an introduction as to different concepts that can help improve your play. We're not looking to, tell you exactly how to play your class or give you the golden ticket by any means, but by hopefully providing everyone with more tools and understanding of the intricacies of the game, you can take that knowledge and apply it and work to get better. So anyway, today we're just going to go over, I'm going to briefly discuss key bindings, and I'll let Mac jump in after I'm kind of done going over what I want to discuss regarding, how you change a key binding in the game, or why you necessarily want to use key bindings rather than clicking, really. And after that, I'll go over some basic macros, stuff like focus target macros, mouse over macros, macros that help you switch targets, stuff like that. All right, so we will go ahead and get started with key bindings. So the first thing I want to go over is basically why key bindings are important and why they'll immensely help your play if you get used to using them. So, I mean, I'll tell a story. When I first started playing the game, I didn't realize that you could even change the key binding of spells, or really, I mean, I was young when I did this, or use key bindings to actually cast anything. I was a clicker, truth be told. And what you'll find is that your reaction time is a lot slower, and you're not really able to execute things as quickly as you could if you're having to click all your abilities. I know of people who are capable of doing it, so I'm not trying to say, anyone who doesn't use a massive amount of key bindings is bad and you have to play this way to be good, because that's not necessarily the case. I like to use the analogy, you're trying to build a house and you have a rock and a hammer to put in a nail. Why won't not use the hammer? It's going to be more effective. So that's kind of how I equate key bindings and a couple other tools like weak auras and raid bots, but we won't get back into those. So basically, what a key binding allows you to do is either use, exactly how it says. It binds a spell to a key on your keyboard, and you press that key on your keyboard and it casts the spell. So to use an example, I know it's kind of small and I apologize for that, but without really messing up my UI, I can't really blow this up too much. But if you look down here, you'll see my action bars, and along the bottom are all my different spells and everything on my druid. And you'll see here in the upper right, now this will be a little different depending on if you, like I use Elv UI and I've customized my UI beyond just base Elv. So if you're using vanilla UI or whatever else, it'll be a little different. But the general concept of this is the same. But you'll see here in the upper right, the little combination of either letter or combination of letters that I have assigned to that slot. So let's pick a good one. Let's see here. Alright, Barkskin. Here is one of my defensive cooldowns. I have it set to R. So if I press R on my keyboard, I cast Barkskin. And instead of having to click it, I can just do that. Now, in theory, you may think, oh, that's not really that big a deal. Like, why is that so important? Well, your mouse being freed up to not have to worry about clicking spells actually enables you to do a lot more. Something that you might hear about often also is keyboard turning, and that's where you use A and D to turn your character. And you'll notice as I move around back and forth here, I actually have my keys bound A and D to strafe left and right rather than turn, because if you use your mouse to move, you can angle your character a lot faster. So to give you an example, if you hold down left click, you'll see that my mouse hand goes away here. You can use that to move the camera around without actually changing where your character is facing. This is kind of helpful if you don't want to move your character and say you're like so say I'm casting at something, but I also want to see if there's an ad coming up behind me. I can move the camera, and as long as I don't untarget what I'm trying to hit, and check real quick before it comes and hit me or something like that. But I don't really use that very often. I don't find myself only moving the camera. If I'm moving something, I'm moving my character and the camera. So next will be holding down both mouse buttons. and these are how the mouse keys are bound by default, so you don't have to change the binding to do this. If you hold down both mouse buttons, you'll start moving forward, and this is pretty much how I move. I also have a I'm not trying to do a product plug or anything, but I have a MMO mouse which has a bunch of buttons on the side, so that can also help if you're looking to really expand your use of key bindings. I have pretty much my entire rotation on my mouse, so that lets me, you know, coordinate where my character is and go through my rotation with my right hand, while my left is focused on making smaller movements, or I have all my cooldowns set to keys in and around W, A, S, and D. The biggest keys I use are Q, E, R, and F. So I usually have defensive, speed boost, cooldown, stuff like that bound to those keys. Oh, yeah, it would help if I removed that 7K. I'm thinking, I totally forgot that was up there. Boom. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. Whatever. I'm a new streamer, I guess you could say. Alright, so that's kind of the gist of why they're important. They just, you know, they make the game easier to play and allows you to use your mouse to do things it's better for than clicking on buttons. By freeing yourself up from doing that, you can run around easier, you can change, you know, like I can spin in circles. I'm not trying to make anybody sick, so I won't do it a whole bunch. Another neat trick, and I can't do this because I should be on my mage for this, but if you hold down the right right mouse button when your character's holding still, you'll pivot rather than just the camera moving. Your character will move, and if you happen to be playing a mage, you can use this to blink. If you have Shimmer talented, you can use that to blink while casting without having to interrupt your cast at all. So say I'm casting a Pyroblast or something like that, or I'll just use like a Lunar Strike here. So say I'm casting a spell, if I wanted, I can change the way I'm facing while I'm casting, and as long as I finish the cast so I'm still facing the target, the spell will go off. Yeah, so that's a little neat trick I learned. I had to learn. That was how I always saw mages doing this weird blink trick, and I couldn't figure out how they were doing it. Eventually, that was when I realized they were using the right mouse click. So real quick, now that I've kind of discussed why they're important, I'll show everybody real quick. And this will change a little bit, again, because I'm using Elv. This menu looks different, but all the options are the same. So if you just go into key bindings, you'll see this really big old window show up, and this has got all your key bindings, you know, what on the left here you've got what each does, and on the right what button you have assigned to it. So like I said, move forward, move backward, or W and S. I have turn left and turn right set to left arrow and right arrow, but I don't even have those keys on my keyboard. I use a 60% keyboard, so I don't ever use those because I don't have them. And strafe left, strafe right, A and D, jump, space bar, stuff like that. But the ones we really want are action bar. So here you'll see my action bar keybinds being 1 through equal signs. I usually just go 1 through 11. And each lines up with the first row here. And then this is where it'll be a little different depending on what kind of UI you're using. Because I have a different UI, don't even believe it'll show up. Multi-action, here we go. So you'll see here, this bottom right action button 1 is lined up with this bar right here, but because I'm using Elv, it's a little different in terms of what bar is where, because I've moved them around so much. In a vanilla UI, it'll tell you like bottom left action button, so it'll be down here. Bottom right action button down here. Right action button over here. So you'll see where the key bindings you're changing line up with the action bars that you've enabled, and you'll be able to sort of edit them from there. So just keep an eye on the action bars you're changing as you're setting up key bindings, and you'll be all set. Like I could show you how I do it in Elv for those who do it. If you just go into Elv UI, it's under action bars, and then general options, keybind mode, and you'll see if I just hover over it with my mouse, I'm able to change the key binding on any one of these buttons, but you can't do that in the vanilla UI. All right, discard. No, because I could. I Yeah, I'll go over it real quick. I'll go ahead and disable Elf super fast to show the regular UI real quick. This is going to make my UI look real wonky, but go ahead and just try this super fast. I haven't loaded this game without LVUI in a long time. Should be fun. Take a drink while I log back in. Alright. Yeah, all sorts of weird. Okay, so let's go ahead. Key bindings. Go down to multi-action bar. So bottom left, action button 1 lines up with this button right here. So if I wanted to change the key binding from Control 7 to say, I don't know, I'll put it on, what's a good one here? We'll do Control 8. Hold down Control, have the mouse over, have clicked it, hit 8, and then it changes the binding to Control 8. So whatever spell I put there, we'll use Control 8, and if you press, if you hold down the modifier Control, then hit 8, it'll cast whatever's in there. Usually I use Control for, like, you can see on my bars there, I'll have like hearthstones, hearthstones, consumables, stuff like that on that bar. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and re-enable Elf so I actually know what I'm looking at here. Anyway, that is sort of just the quick rundown of how to change your key bindings in the game. You just go to that menu and you can, that's kind of the beauty of PC gaming in general, but it applies to WoW as well, in that usually the controls are very customizable, and you should take that to your advantage, because if you can put together a keyboard layout that works better for you, then you'll probably do more damage or tank more damage or heal more. So, it's just one of those easy ways to improve yourself without having to go through much more trouble than thinking out a layout that you might want to use. Did you want to jump in with anything else, Mac? Try to cover most of what I think is relevant.
I think you got it all there.
All right. So, and I haven't seen the chat moving. I think we're good on questions. Did I miss anything, Ezra? Besides my time thing?
No, that's it.
Okay. Alrighty. So next we're just going to go over a few basic macros that Mac helped me put together in terms of what we consider to be the most useful and the most relevant in terms of what will actually improve your play. So we're going to go ahead and start with, alrighty, let me go ahead and pull up my list. Edit command. Okay, cooldown macro. Alright, that's a good one. So one of the first macros I'll go over is a macro that you can use to pop all your cooldowns in one global cooldown. And of course, I mentioned BFA earlier. These macros won't work as well in BFA because they're putting a lot of cooldowns on the global. So if you have something like, what's a good example? Like a Frost Death Knight, Pillar of Frost, and Obliteration. I believe those are both now on the GCD. So these macros, you'll just have to make sure that you're actually casting all the spells. But for stuff like Racials, they took Berserking and Blood Fury back off. So for those of us, yeah, what Max said, some will be relevant. The ones that incorporate Racials, so if you play a Troll, like most of my characters are Trolls, I have Berserking as a Racial. And rather than having to press a separate button to use that as well as my big DPS cooldown, which is on my Druid, I have Celestial Alignment talented, I can press Q and the macro will activate both at the same time, so I don't have to think about them. And that way my Berserking always lines up with Celestial Alignment. So you'll see here the way I have written the macro. So the first line is something that will be present in pretty much every macro that I have that you see an image for. And that is hashtag show tooltip. What hashtag show tooltip does is it identifies the first spell indicated in the macro and uses that as the tooltip image. So for this CD macro I have here, I've got show tooltip. I wish I could make this one bigger. And then the next line is a simple cast command, which is /cast, and then the name of the cooldown that you want to cast. So in my case, it's Celestial Alignment. On this next line down here, you see I have Incarnation Chosen of Elune instead on the third line. That's so that if I ever talent into Celestial Alignment, this macro will just automatically change itself. I don't have to have two macros, one for celestial alignment and one for incarn. If I have either spell, it'll use those. And then the last line here is to cast Berserking, so that I always use my troll racial. So I'll show you how that talent change works super fast. Get in there. So if you look down here, this is the macro loaded. It's in my queue slot right now. So I'll go to my talents. If you see, if I switch between the two, the image is changing, which means the macro is recognizing my change in spell. So that, and then I'll go ahead and just use it real quick. I know it's probably pretty easy to understand. So targeting here, and then I'll go ahead and cast once or twice. And then if I hit Q, I've got Incarn going, and I've got Blood Fury going. So that's the gist of them. They just make your life easier, and you don't have to think about having your, to press 4 different cooldowns at once, and instead you just, press it once and you've got all your cooldowns rolling. So those are cooldown macros. Those are probably the most basic and easiest to write, besides a few other ones. So the next one we'll go into, now that I've kind of discussed cooldown macro, is let's go ahead and do, let's start with focus targets. It's a fun one. So beyond the target that you have selected, so my friend Mac here, he's my target, here's my target right here, you can also set a focus. And you can write macros to interact with your focus target. A lot of the use I see for this in terms of rating, mythic rating on down, is using them for an interrupt on a mob that has to be interrupted on a regular basis. Mythic Coven of Shavara is a good example. Even if on Mythic there's a 4th boss that spawns that has a spell that needs to be continuously interrupted, and that's one of the best places for a focus macro. Is if you set her as a focus and then use a macro to cast your interrupt at your focus, you don't really have to think about making sure that she's targeted. Rather, you just hit the macro and it'll always cast at your focus target. So the first macro I'm going to go over briefly is it's just a macro to set your focus. So, and it's really simple. I have it set up here to /focus. So that is the command to set a focus target. And I've included a few parameters to make it easier, to let me kind of single out what exactly I want to focus. But for the start, the macro is simply /focus at target. Should do it. Go ahead and drag this down to where I can use it. Up there. So I'm targeting Mac here. Boom. I click that /focus in brackets at target, and then this is in my UI, this is where my focus target comes up. So now I have Mac set as my focus target. I'm sure he likes that. And then if I wanted to say, let's see, what did I set up as my focus target? I think I did roots, yeah. So for the macro example I decided, what if I wanted to set a focus target and they need to be CC'd regularly, rooted down. So I want Entangling Roots to be cast on my focus target. Of course, he's not hostile to me, so I'm not going to be able to actually cast it at him. But you'll see here, show tooltip /cast. So the show tooltip is still there to show the Entangling Roots image. /cast, because it's a spell. In brackets, you're going to put at focus to target your focus, and then Entangling Roots. So to get off Mac here a second, I'll go ahead and here's the focus macro again. So I've got the Raiders training dummy right here, set as my focus, and then go ahead and use this macro. I'll just bring it down here, click it, and it will, so even if I am targeting this other dummy, as long as I have visibility on the other target, it should. Yep. So you'll see it's actually immune to the root, but it's targeting over here. So I'll do it again there for you. So another one would be, I talked about interrupt, so I'll do an interrupt example. The Druid interrupt, or the Balanced Druid interrupt, is Solar Beam. So I've updated the macro to cast Solar Beam instead of Entangling Roots. If you hit save, you got to make sure you do that whenever you change your macro. It will go ahead and, yep, it'll update the image. That's usually a good, if it saves and it updates the image, it's usually a good indication you wrote at least part of it right. And then same thing. So I am attacking the PvP training dummy. And then the rating dummy starts casting something. I don't have to untarget the PvP training dummy. Just click that, boom, and I'm still targeting the PvP dummy, but I cast Solar Beam on the other dummy. Again, there aren't, whenever there's an interrupt rotation or something along those lines, this is when those really come in handy, but there are a lot of different uses for focus macros. PvPers use them a lot, I believe, but I am terrible at PvP yet. I don't think I've ever stepped into a rated PvP match in my life. So they have their uses there, but I can't speak to them. But in PvP, that's the majority of what I see them for. Either CC rotations, when a specific mob needs to be locked down, or interrupt rotations, where you set something as your focus and you just have a macro set up so that you can just bounce back and forth without actually having to untarget what you want to be hitting, like a boss. Okay, so I've gone over cooldowns, and then we got cast. Okay, so the next one we'll go over real quick. This one also has some niche uses, but can be very helpful depending on what class you are. Paladins with Blessing of Protection, for example, if you ever wanted to dispel a bop off yourself, you can use a Cancel Aura macro. A really good example of this, actually better, is I have a macro set up like this for Aspect of the Turtle on my Hunter. So if I ever want to immune a single ability, to harken back to, say, for those who have seen Kill Jaden, the big swirlies that he sends out, that immunity, someone with an immunity needed to soak. The problem with, Aspect of the Turtle is you want to activate it, and then after you soak an ability, you want to deactivate it again so you can get back to doing damage. You can do that with a Cancel Aura macro, and that's what this macro I have right here is for. So this is a Cancel Aura macro that will cancel out, basically dispel Barkskin for yourself. This is what happens if you right-click a buff up in your little buff area here, but by using a macro, you don't have to drag your mouse all the way over there and try and find the buff you're trying to dispel, when you might have, if you have like a druid in the raid, you're going to have like 4 different hots on you, and you might have like a Healthstone rolling and all these other buffs that are coming through, and it'll be kind of hard to track down exactly what you're trying to dispel. This way, you just click one button and it dispels the aura and you're good. So the macro itself is quite simple, only 2 lines. The first line being show tooltip. I included Barkskin in here just because I wanted to make sure that it shows, but it should if I just get rid of it. Nope. Okay, so with Cancel Aura macros, that's right. Yeah, you are going to need. So with a Cancel Aura macro, because it's canceling and not casting the spell, you just need to include the name of the spell that you want it to show. So you just do that by including the name of the spell next to the show tooltip. So if you just do show tooltip Barkskin, nope, not Barksip. So it'll just go back to having the little Barkskin picture. And then what this will do is, if I go ahead and I'll put this on my bars here, go ahead and cast Barkskin. You can see it up here, right up here. And then if I hit this, boom, goes away. And then into this macro will even show the cooldown on it as well. So if you wanted to add a line to this macro, what you can do, you have to be careful when doing this, because I have a tendency to do it as well. With Cancel Aura macros that also cast the spell, it has the potential to cancel. If you hit it more than once, you'll immediately cast it and then immediately dispel it. So, like, if you're smashing a key to try and get a defensive off, and it's also a Cancel Aura macro, you could immediately cancel the buff and get yourself killed. I've done that more than once when I was learning to play my Hunter with Turtle. So we'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and add a line here. So the line is simply like with the other macro we went over with Solar Beam, cast Barkskin. That should also, yep. So by putting that cast Barkskin, it also just lets the show tooltip command work. And we see I've got Barkskin off the cooldown now. So if I hit this macro once, what it should do here is it'll cast Barkskin, and if I hit it again, it'll cancel it. So if you have an immunity, like I think Demon Hunters have one, Netherwalk, no, yeah, Netherwalk, not Blur, and like I said, Turtle, Ice Block is another really good example. So if you have a ice block macro, you can press it once to ice block, and then as soon as the thing that's would have killed you is gone, you can cancel out your ice block and get back to casting without having to wait for the entire duration of ice block. It's a little min-maxy, sure, but you'll find yourself quickly getting used to it, and once you do, you'll realize how much more effective it is being able to quickly jump into immunity and then jump back out. For regular defensives like Astral Shift or anything else that's just like a straight DR, there really isn't too much reason you would ever need a cancel or a macro. But for classes with immunities, they're pretty important. They can be very helpful. And it doesn't gimp your damage by using an immunity, because as soon as you immune the damage, you can you can cancel out the immunity that's preventing you from continuing to attack and keep on going. So that is a cancel aura macro. And I know I tend to talk a little fast, but we're going to have a little, this will be released as a VOD as well. If you like visuals more than a written guide, and I believe we'll also have something written up. We already do have a Google Doc, so it'll just need to be edited and improved, and then we'll have that there as well. So, all right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and keep going. Let's see here. Simple focus macro, simple target macro. Okay, so this next one's a fun one. Actually, these are macros I didn't start using until Legion, and then which I should have been using them more. So let me pull the chat back up here. Okay, so this is a target macro. There's a couple different kinds, and this is where macros can start getting a little bit more fancy. So the macro, let's see, what should I start with? I'm going to do mouse overs last. That focus. So we'll start with an @player macro, because that's a pretty simple one. So there are some spells that you might find you always want to cast on yourself. So I chose Innervate. As a boomkin, you generally don't want to be innervating yourself, but it is a buff that I can cast on anybody. So rather than having to use the self-cast key, which a lot of people don't know about and I don't really use, you could just make a macro. So in this macro, what this will do, it will cast Innervate at myself. So you'll see here, I still have the show tooltip, and then I have /cast @player in brackets, so that'll mean your character, Innervate. So I'll drag Innervate down here, and then go ahead and click. Oh, that's right, I actually can't cast Innervate on myself, can I? Yeah, oh, great. All right, what's another buff I have here? Regrowth. Shows you how much I play Boomkin. Okay, there we go. So I don't have a target. Like say I'm like attacking this guy right over here, but I really need to cast a Regrowth on myself. Just do this, and then boom, just cast a Regrowth on yourself. Now, the game will also generally auto default to casting on yourself if you have an enemy target selected and you use a healing spell. So with something like Regrowth, this really wouldn't necessarily be all that important, but it does give you an idea as to the functionality behind them. The last thing we'll do after I go over some examples is just briefly talk about, I've been going over, what /cast and then what's in the brackets. I'll go over a little bit of the structure behind macros, because I have this document here, and it'll show a little bit behind, what each line is actually doing. And when I get into the mouse over macros, I'll be explaining a little bit more about the conditionals that I have written into them to make sure that they're not just like targeting anything willy-nilly. So that's an @player macro. And then the other one here, let's see, CDs, oh, the other target macro. Okay, so this is the cool one. So this has, depending on your class, some very interesting uses. Mythic Baromothras, this is a really interesting macro to have, but since I assume the vast majority of people maybe not have seen that fight yet, I won't really use that as too much of an example. But to give you an idea as to what this macro can do is that it basically lets you hit something that isn't what you're actively targeting with a spell, and then not have to actually retarget the mob that you were first targeting. So you see here, this is hooked up to cast Star Surge. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this down to my bars. So say this So what did I just hit the rating dummy or the PV chunk? So say the rating trading dummy right here is the boss. And then the PvP training dummy is a really strong ad that has a channel that if you don't kill it fast enough is going to wipe the raid. So you need to switch to it real fast, kill it, and then immediately start going back to hitting the boss with your abilities. What this macro does is lets you do that without having to tab target and all these other shenanigans with one button. So I'll go over the writing real quick and then I will show it in action. So you'll see here, again, show tooltip, same thing as it always is. / target exact PvP training dummy. So that will, when the macro is pressed, target the PvP training dummy right here. It will target something with that exact name, so if I misspelled it, it wouldn't work. It will cast Star Surge at the PvP training dummy, since I used target exact on it, and then you use / target last target. You will switch back to your original target without you actually having to do it. So I'll show it off here in a second. All right, let's go ahead and get out of this. Gotta just build up some astral power here. Go ahead and keep going. Okay, that's 40. So you'll see there, I'm still targeting the Raiders dummy, so just watch the little circle here, because that shows you what I'm targeting. If I press this macro, hits the other one, and untargets and retargets the first mob you were hitting so fast you can't even notice it. Again, this macro has, I would say it's a more niche macro. You're not going to need it all the time. Mac gave a great example. If you play a Destruction Warlock, Havoc is a great ability to use this kind of macro for. If you have an exact target, say, Dogs, the second boss in Taurus. If you want to make sure you always have Havoc up on whatever dog you're not targeting, so say you go into the fight saying you're going to target, oh gosh, I forget the names. Fjarg and Shatug. Okay, so say you know you're going to be always targeting Shatug, but you're a Destruction Warlock and you want to be cleaving on a second target. Yeah, I'll let Mac show off here. So what his macro lets him do is quickly reapply Havoc without really having to worry about tabbing to the other target, applying the spell, and then tabbing back. It's just one button, real quick, switches the target for him, applies Havoc, and then switches back. So he can continue his rotation without really having to worry about it. And that's sort of the power of macros, and I think one of the best examples of why I think, and a lot of, Mythic Raiders think they're important, is because they allow you to do things in less steps, which means less, mental processing about thinking about having to do different things. Like you're having to tab between targets to try and apply debuffs and all this other stuff, then it's going to slow down your decision making. And if you can keep your decision making quick, then you can get more spells out, you can get more damage out, and it's just going to, it'll increase your DPS overall. And these are helpful for tanks and stuff as well. It's easier to use DPS as an example because they have, more DPS is generally better, so that's a much easier metric to measure than something like tank survivability, which of course is important, but is not as easily quantifiable. Okay, so let's see what we've got left here. All right, so, okay. So I'm gonna go over, before we get into mouse overs, one more macro that I don't know if a lot of people know about, but one that can be pretty game-changing for a lot of classes. I made an Elemental Shaman, as I'm sure I talk about all the time, so it's probably easy to figure out. But this argument in a macro makes that class so much easier, it's insane. So I have Starfall as an example here, and what this macro is a @cursor macro. So any spell that is smart cast in the game. So of course I'm going to need Astral Power to do this, but so let's get some dots rolling. Okay, so let me build this up here. So I can actually use a Starfall. Be one more 60. Yeah. Okay, so normally macro out or the regular spot. Here we go. You'll see, like with a spell like Starfall, Earthquake, Flame Shock, Totems, anything with a sort of AoE effect, you get this big green circle. And in order to actually cast the spell, you have to hit it once to bring up the targeting circle, and then click it again to actually cast the spell. Yes, yes, Zappy boy. Oh gosh, totally made me lose my train of thought. I'm sorry. Oh, cursor macros. What these allow you to do is eliminate the need to actually have to click this after you pull up the circle. It uses your cursor, so the little mouse hand right here, as the center of the targeting field, and then just cast the spell. So I'll use Starfall as the example. Of course, Starfall has a huge range, but all right. So I should have it just set as 6. Yeah. So I need to build some astral power again real fast. Use my moons here. Okay. So rather than doing this, which is, you know, who wants to click twice to cast a spell when you can do it once? If I have on 6 the macro to do this. So if I just hit 6, it'll cast it. And it uses my cursor as the center of the targeting reticle and just puts it down. And this can be, depending on what class you play, a game changer. Because it eliminates having to target things. Or at least having to pinpoint target with abilities. Now, some it makes sense. Like Stun Capacitor Totem. Generally, if you're either new to a class or, you know, at this point, I have a pretty good idea of the range of Cap Totem, so I can eyeball it and usually get everybody I want in a Cap Totem by using this method. So, but if you have forms of CC or things you're not exactly comfortable aiming without the circle, that's when you wouldn't use this macro. But for something like I think Flame Strike and Earthquake are probably the 2 best examples, where you just want to stick your cursor in the general vicinity of the middle of a pack of mobs, hit a button, and then just call a Flame Shock down or a Flame Strike down, then it makes things faster and you can keep it makes your rotation a lot more smooth. Yeah, or Rain of Fire is another good example. I'm glad I have Mac here. He's got all the fun, flashy Warlock spells. Instead of having him having to drag the circle around and click, he plays his Warlock a lot. He understands the range and the area of effect of Rain of Fire. He just puts his cursor where he thinks he needs it to be, presses the button once, and Rain of Fire is exactly where he needs it to be. So go ahead and show real quick. So these @cursor macros are simply /cast, and then in brackets you put @cursor, and then whatever spell you want to cast using this method. And that's it. So 2 lines, super simple, but can make a world of difference because these are actually kind of new. I believe they added this in 8.1. Is that right, Mac? Did they add the functionality for @cursors? Was that 8.1 or 7.1, the first major Legion patch? Still in Discord?
I'm pretty sure it's yeah, one of the more recent updates.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. I couldn't remember exactly which patch this was. Anyway, that's something that they added in Legion, so it's a more recent addition to what you can do with macros, but one that makes life a lot easier. So I definitely recommend, if you play one of the classes that uses these spells on a regular basis, like Blizzard is another example, makes your life a lot easier. And that's what we're here for, making your life easier and making you do more damage. So, alright, the last macros I'm going to go over are the little bit more complicated ones, but the really useful ones. And ones that, depending again on what class you play, these can be extremely helpful for healers, just about anybody in a few examples, and for dot-based classes especially. That's why I set all this up on my Boomkin, because I could use mouse over macros, which is what we're going over next, for Sunfire and Moonfire. And then you can also use these for heals, which I'll give an example of, and for a couple other targeted casted spells. So first we'll go over offensive spells, and then we'll go over heals and something like Battle Res, which I happen to have here too. So go to my Moonfire macro here. Okay. So what I have set up here is a mouse over macro that has 2 functions. First, it targets whatever enemy I have my cursor over. So in this case, like, and you'll see here, I have you see the little sword over the PvP training dummy. I am moused over that target, so if I were to hit this macro, it would target that enemy and then cast Moonfire at it. I'll just show it. So rather than me having to tab target back and forth between these two, I mouse over it, hit it. It automatically targets the enemy for me and puts Moonfire on it. You can see my buffs up here. And then if, say, there's a whole bunch of ads, so I need to keep Moonfiring, I just go over here and then hit the same macro, and it automatically targets for me and casts Moonfire on that as well. And I can just keep going back and forth, doing that over and over again. It'll keep swapping targets, keep recasting. Now, for dot-based DPS classes, this makes applying your dots a heck of a lot easier. Instead of having to tab through targets and hope that the, frankly, mediocre tab targeting in this game gets to everybody, you control where your dots go just by mousing over them. And in boss fights, when there are boss frames, so I think I can pull up an example. Actually, that main unit frames, boss frames. Here we go. Let me see. Display frames. So yeah, ignoring all the crazy buffs and debuffs they have on them. With a mouse over macro and boss frames, you can use a mouse over macro to cast on a boss, even if you aren't necessarily within its field of vision. So say, for example, you're fighting dogs again. You want to dot up Shatug and the fire dog, Fjarg. In that fight, there will be boss frames here that show the purple dog and the red dog, and you can use these macros to say, all right, I need to, oh, it looks like, here's their debuffs. It looks like Moonfire and Sunfire are about to fall off one of the dogs. I need to target him real quick. Rather than having to tab target him, you can just move your mouse over the frame and hit the macros for them, and it'll reapply the dots. You still have to make sure that you at least have the enemy in your field of vision in most cases. There are some dots that allow you to cast them without being facing them. If I remember correctly, it's Affliction Warlocks and Shadow Priests and maybe Boomkins. I can check that real. Let's see here. Yep. Okay, so it is Boomkins as well. So in some cases where dots are pretty integral to the spec, you can actually cast dots without having to be directly facing the target. But like, again, my Elemental Shaman as an example, I can't flame shock something behind me. So you can play around with these and figure out exactly whether you have the capability to do that or not, depending on your class. Like, I'm not going to pretend I have this super intimate knowledge of every class and every spec. So that's something you know, real quick, you can test that on your own, and then you'll know whether you can do it or not. But these macros make applying dots to multiple targets, either through the boss frames or just by mousing over them in a pack of mobs, or just with a boss, so much easier. And you can do it quickly, you can just move your mouse around, and this also reiterates the point as to why it's a good idea to have your mouse free. You wouldn't be able to use mouse over macros if you were clicking everything, because it would all be down here. This way you have your mouse available. So I'm going to show real quick how you go ahead and write one of these. So here's that Moonfire macro I was using. So the first line is what is the line that is targeting each mob that I'm switching between. And the second line, or I guess it would technically be the third line, but ignoring the show tooltip, is what's actually casting the spell. You don't necessarily need to target each. What's the best way to phrase this? You can use mouse over macros without actually swapping targets. So if I went ahead and cut this out. So say, for example, I got rid of the second line. And all the macro was /cast at mouse over harm no dead, which I'll go over in a second what the harm and no dead mean in the second parentheses here is Moonfire. So go ahead and save that. And so here, so I have this guy targeted right here. So cast Moonfire on it. And then if I don't, and then if I can cast Moonfire on the second target and not change what I'm actually targeting. So I can keep casting Solar Wrath on my main target and then say, oh, looks like my dot's getting ready to fall off really fast, reapply Moonfire, and then keep targeting. So it kind of shows you a little bit the versatility of macros. But in what I like to use them for, I like them to also retarget when I cast mouse over or use mouse over macros. That's just a personal thing, so that's why I have them in there, but that's also why I want to show you guys so you know how you do that as well. So I'll go back. I will go ahead and put this back. Okay. Clicking. Unlearn clicking at the moment. But how does mouse over target using the mouse to move? So if you're using the mouse to move, you can't actually use mouse over macros at the same time, because as you can see, when you're using, you're holding down both mouse buttons, the little cursor goes away because you're using it to aim. And if you're wanting to be on the move and use mouse over macros, just use what did I just add to? Just use your normal movement keys. Just use W, A, S, and D, and then like I could run back and forth here and cast Sunfire for days and be on the move while casting it and still be able to switch back and forth. So the key to WoW is being versatile and being ready to switch between things. So if you got to be moving, but you also want to be casting on the move rather than using your mouse to move, unless you can unless you have something bound, like say I don't know, say for example, if I could cast Solar Wrath on the move, I can't. I could use the mouse to move, and because I have a gaming mouse, or if I were using the keyboard, could do that. But yeah, if you're using mouse over macros like this, you don't want to also be using your mouse to move while you're trying to do. Okay. Oh yeah, no problem. And thanks, Mac, for picking up on that as well. Okay, go back to the macros real quick here. So I went over the target, and you guys probably are tired of hearing me say /target and /cast, so I won't go over those. So that's the start of the second and third line. The conditionals are what make mouse over macros interesting, and what you have to be a little careful with. So the first part of this of the macros conditionals, which are what are in these brackets right here, is at mouse over, because that's what I want the spell to hit, or what I want to target. So I have at mouse over. Now these next two are what may seem odd, but are actually very important. Because Moonfire is an offensive spell, things can get busy in a raid fight. I might have my mouse accidentally move over somebody, like, here's Mac. Like say Mac is, of course, I'm a heck of a lot taller than him, so it's going to be a little bit hard for me to target hit him with my mouse. But say I'm trying to cast Moonfire, and I happen to move my mouse over Mac while I'm trying to cast. If I don't have these extra conditionals here, that being harm and no dead, the game will try and cast Moonfire at Mac, and it won't work. So what the harm conditional does is indicates in the macro that after you're targeting the mouse over target has to be something hostile to you. So at mouse over, comma, /harm means the macro will only work on something that is a hostile to you, something that you can damage, and then no dead is exactly what you think it is. The macro won't target things that are dead. So those three combined, Percy has the toy. Those three things combined make it so that I'm targeting something with this macro, I'm hitting it with Moonfire, and I'm also making sure that what the macro is attempting to target is something I can do damage to, and something that isn't dead. Because say, I can't really use training dummies as an example, but say there's something dead on the ground next to this training dummy, and I happen to mouse over it while I'm trying to cast Moonfire on it, it'll try and cast Moonfire on that, and that obviously won't either. So this just kind of reduces the chance for error, and that's why conditionals are important. Because without them, you'll just be throwing. The game will be trying to throw Sunfire or Moonfire or whatever else you're trying to use mouse overs for anywhere, and it'll just be much less efficient, and you'll get errors thrown in your face. So, and like the last little bit, and I wish I could make this window bigger. It's a little hard to see here. Is a set of open and closed brackets at the end of the conditionals of the cast command. And what that means is that after the macro runs through these first set of conditionals, if none of them are met, it will just cast Moonfire at whatever I'm targeting. So in this example, so I've got this right here, and so you see I have my mouse over it. I'm using the same macro. Cast Moonfire on it all I want. Cast some Moonfire over here. So if I say move my, like say I've got my cursor somewhere that isn't directly over the enemy, but I still need to cast Moonfire on it, by having that open and closed brackets, it will still cast Moonfire if you press the button. So I'll take my mouse over here, I'll put it over Mac, and then I'll press 3. So it's still casting Moonfire on my target without my mouse being over it. And without that open and closed bracket, this wouldn't be the case. It would just say, I could check and double check what the error message would be. But the short of it is, it wouldn't work as well. So yeah, the macro wouldn't work. I would attempt to do it, and see here that this works fine. As soon as I try and take it off here, there you go. Now that my mouse isn't on the target and it's on something else, I can't cast at Moonfire anymore. So having that open and closed parenthesis is good, or bracket, excuse me, is good to make sure that no matter what, if you press the button, it's going to be casting at least your target or your mouse over target if you have one. Fix that real quick. All right, moving right along. The only other problem is I have like terrible vision, so it's hard to see when it's small. Okay. All right, so the same thing goes for Sunfire, and you can use the same sort of writing for, or the same lines for any deep dots you want to use. So I won't go over the Sunfire one. So the last two macros I've got to show off are a mouse over healing macro, and a mouse over dispel macro, and mouse over battle res macro. So I am terrible at healing, which is why I don't heal, but on the times when I have healed on an alt, which is rare, I use mouse over macros to make all my healing so much easier. So I'm going to use Mac, the now very tall Eridar, as my guinea pig here. So with this macro I have set up on regrowth down here, I can mouse over either Mac himself, or ideally, and what makes them really useful, his party frame, and cast a heal on him, rather than having to click him, then hit the spell. So just it makes healing a whole bunch easier, and someone like me who needs all the help he can get, trust me, it makes a difference. So show tooltip, this is the regrowth macro, same thing, show tooltip / cast, and then in the brackets, same thing first, at mouse over, target the mouse over you have, and then help instead of harm, which is to make sure that when you're targeting this, same idea in that, except the opposite. Instead of targeting hostile targets, you're targeting helpful targets. So I'm not going to, if I'm using this macro and I happen to have my mouse accidentally over an enemy, besides the fact that you can't cast a regrowth that's at something that's hostile to you, you don't want to confuse the macro and try and make it do that. So by having the help there, it will only target friendly players or friendly NPCs. And then no dead is the same thing. If Mac is dead, I can't heal him. So doing this makes it so that it won't work, or it won't target my mouse over if it's dead. And then I have the same brackets here, so that if these conditionals aren't met, if I don't have a mouse over target, or they're dead, or they're hostile, it'll just cast a regrowth at my target. And then, yeah, that's as simple as that one. So, Mac, if you don't mind, if you have Burning Rush, don't mind taking a little damage, that would be swell. And then I'll go ahead and heal you up real quick. Probably first and last time you're ever going to want me to heal anything. Mind throwing Burning Rush on for me for a second, if you have it talented? Thank you, sir. Alright, so he's dropping in health. Out of the macro here. Then I have my mouse over him. I don't have him targeted. I just go ahead and try to save him before he dies. And you'll see here, I'm casting regrowth on him. And I have like no mana as a boomkin, but that's how the idea is, that you can use party frames to target healing spells without actually having to target somebody. Alright, Mac, you're good. Unless you want to be used as a battle res dummy. I don't know if I can kill you. Okay. Yeah.
Cannot.
Yes, this will be clipped together and put in a nice fat format for YouTube, and then it'll be up there as well. Yeah, we're trying to give it to you guys as many formats as possible. So anyway, that's a simple healing mouse over macro. But again, I am not a healer, and if you look at class guides, a lot of them have macros sections. So if you're looking for additional stuff about, oh, what spells for my class would be really good on a macro, you can look there as well, and that'll be where the experts will be able to help you out with some class-specific macros. And then, all right, the next one, it's very similar. I don't think I'll be able to dispel anything off Mac, but so something like a dispel could be the same thing. Say Mac is, I don't know, poison himself. What can I dispel as a boomkin? Yeah, poison's perfect. So he's got a poison on himself, and I want to get rid of it. Oh, there goes the webcam. That's fun. I do the same thing. Mouse over him, click the button, and you see the little dispel right there. And then if I don't have a mouse over target, and I click the button, it'll just try and dispel myself instead. So the macro for that is the same. Show tooltip / cast at mouse over help note ed second bracket to make sure that if I don't have a mouse over, it'll target me instead, or target my current target instead. And then if I have nothing targeted, it will be a self target, and then remove corruption. So those are some really simple healing macros that I know helped me a lot, so I imagine it'll help a lot too. And then similar thing for rebirth, a battle res. Basically, any healing or dispel, like blessings for paladins. This is another really great way to use those. Because say you've got you got a raider who's taking a crap ton of damage, and you play a holy paladin, or you play a protection, or I think all the does Red have sack? I don't even remember. I don't play a red paladin. But say you're a paladin and you need to put sack on somebody, rather than having to find them in the raid frames, click them and cast the spell, you just use a mouse over macro with Blessing of Sacrifice, and you hover over their raid frame, click the macro, and it just casts Blessing of Sacrifice. And then they're taking less damage, and you only had to take the time to find them in the raid frames rather than having to target them, which makes you untarget the boss. And then after you cast it, you have to retarget the boss, and just makes life harder than it needs to be. And that's what macros are there to prevent. They're made to make life easier. So I believe that covers Sunfire, Moonfire, just about every major kind of macro that we thought would be good to go over. Macros can get pretty complicated. Something that we had, obviously, if you were here before the stream, we were discussing, which I don't think I'm going to go into, really. There are things called cast sequence macros, which you can use for an opener. They're a little bit, I don't have too much familiarity with writing them, which is why I don't want to talk about them. I'm not big about talking about something unless I'm at least confident enough in it to understand how to explain it. So I really won't go into cast sequence macros, but the documentation we have for this lesson includes some links to there are plenty of the fan-made websites. I believe, let's see, what are the ones that we have on here? Go ahead and, yeah, I'll pull this up real quick. So, see here on the crazy list we have here. So this link for Wowpedia has a list of a lot of the different macro commands that you can use. Macros are very versatile, and you can use them for a lot of different things in the game, which is why I kind of just wanted to go over the basics and give you an idea as to why they're important and some of the things they can help you do in combat. But combat applications aren't the only things that macros have. Like if I really wanted, like if I really wanted to, I don't know, lick Mac or tickle him or something. Go ahead and do that. And if I just did a macro that was / tickle, save this here, and then targeted Mac, maybe I have to do at target. That does the trick. What are the... I used to have a tickle macro. Oh, here we go. I'll just do a save macro instead. So, say I really wanted to say something over and over and over again. I don't know why you would ever spam this, but, oh. Yeah, that would probably work better. Okay, let's try that. Would help if I actually used the correct name of an emote. The Mac's got one going there. Still not working. Anyway, that's the other thing with macros. So they're not perfect, and sometimes you take it takes a little fiddling to really get them working. And I'm not perfect with them, so if I ever don't have one working, then I usually troubleshoot it, and eventually I'll figure it out. So if it doesn't work on the first shot, don't be discouraged because it happens all the time. But I'll just do /say. See if I can get this one to go out here. Oh, you know what? I bet it's because I was clicking the wrong button. Yeah, there we go. So I made a macro that just says hello over and over again. If I really wanted to greet somebody a lot, then yeah, there you go. Like Mac uses one for reses. I think you have, yeah. We use one for Argus intermissions. Don't you? You have a macro for soul wells, don't you? Yeah, there you go. So you can see he's got a soul well macro. So he's got a macro together where he has a cast command, so that when he casts an ability, it casts, and then he also says something while he casts it. So you can use macros for all sorts of fun things. But those are sort of the basics, and I think that covers just about everything we wanted to go over in terms of this lesson. I think that's just about everything. Mac, was there anything else that I missed that you maybe wanted to go over or think I should go over?
I was going to say that when you're using /cast macros, just regular /cast macros, ones you want to line up your cooldowns for and whatnot, they will continue to cast every ability in the macro until it reaches a global cooldown. So, for instance, when I'm using this on my warrior, I will line up like Battle Cry and Avatar, and then I'll put Rampage at the very end of the list, so all the buffs will go off, and then it'll immediately cast Rampage after that.
Yep, there you go. That's a good idea. So to give you another example of kind of what Mac's saying, to make using your cooldowns even easier, let's go ahead and so I have that same, rather than using the warrior example, I'll use the druid example. So let's say so I want to pop on my cooldowns, and immediately I want to go to my rotation. So I put cast solar wrath. Nope. Adding that should make it so that, all right, we got there, we got there. So I'm targeting this guy. I'm going to use all my cooldowns and start casting. So I hit Q, and boom, immediately, right as cast all my cooldowns, and it starts casting for me, and that just makes things easier to get things started. So if you want to include that in a cooldown macro, like Mac said, as soon as you hit the global, that's when the macro will stop. But so if you have 2 or 3 buffs you want to cast all at once, and then have one spell that you want to start your rotation with, you can add that to a cooldown macro. And then one other thing that I can mention super fast that I didn't earlier about the @cursor macros. So another thing you can do with something like Starfall is that if instead of you wanting to cast it at your cursor, you want yourself to be the center of the circle of stars or flame or whatever, you can use @player instead of @cursor. I spelled player right. And like Mac just did an example right here. He used his Rain of Fire macro, and he was the center of the Rain of Fire. So I have my, would help if I didn't hold it. And so here's my Starfall macros all set up. It's still set on 6. I cast a full moon here, that'll help. And boom, boom. Oh, Astral Power, come on. All right, and then if I just wanted myself to be the center of the Starfall, click the macro. Boom, look at that. I'm right in the center, and then the Starfall's all around me. So that's another fun little thing you can do. All right, with that, I try to keep an eye on the chat, Azo, and I don't think I saw the one question. Was there anything else that you got DM'd or anything along the lines?
Nope, I think that covers everything.
Cool. All right. With that, I think that covers just about everything. So I appreciate you guys stopping by. Feel free to, if you have any other questions, shoot them my way, shoot them Mac's way, whatever you'd like. Yeah, don't use yell macros in cities unless you want to peeve a lot of people off. And besides that, we are all set. I hope you guys learned something. And if you have any questions, I'm around in the Discord. Mac's around in the Discord. A lot of the carriers like helping out, so feel free to shoot us a message and if you need help with anything. I especially, if it's a class I play, I like to help out. So yeah, I appreciate everybody's time. Hope you learned something, and look forward to the next one.